Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharjasya Tarasati Shri Srimad. A divine grace of Bhāgavatam Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Nityalila Vishnu Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Asta Tarasati Shri Srimad. Divine grace Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Swami Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. Grantha Raj Srimad Bhāgavatam Ki. Gaur Premanandi. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru, Sri Gauranga, and Srila Prabhupada. Continued reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Additional Pastimes, chapter titled Opening a Temple in Los Angeles. Swamiji said that saintly persons in India often sat under trees and even lived there with no other shelter. The 6 Goswamis who wrote books under the orders of Lord Chaitanya lived in this way. In Vrindavan, staying each night in a different tree, under a different tree, and compiling sublime Sanskrit literatures. Hearing Swamiji speak on such transcendental subjects in this setting fit perfectly. The devotees' ideal notions of the Guru beneath an ancient towering banyan tree in India, and this was continued from last week when Srila Prabhupada walked across the street from the first Los Angeles temple into a neighbor's yard and sat down under their tree. It didn't seem to them that they were sitting in an ordinary neighborhood in Los Angeles. Often Aniruddha would return to the apartment after shopping or errands, and he would see from afar this gorgeous-looking, saffron-robed person sitting there on the grassy lawn. One day, Subal, Govinda Dasi, Rai Ram, and others sat with Prabhupada in the shade. Prabhupada observed a pair of white butterflies. "Just see these worms," he said, pointing to the butterflies. "Here also there is husband and wife. The whole world is in this bondage." Knowing Subal was still lamenting, Prabhupada continued to speak about the topic on both their minds. "It is not so wonderful that Krishna Devi has left," he said. "What is wonderful is that we are able to stay and serve Krishna. The Maya is so strong, it is Krishna's divine energy. And for someone to actually stay engaged in Krishna's service is very rare. A living entity is practically helpless under the sway of Maya's power and can only cry out to Krishna for help. But we have to pray at every moment that the power of Maya does not disturb us." Subal continued to live with Srila Prabhupada, cooking for him, tending to his personal needs, and carving deities of Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada wrote Krishna Devi again, "Your husband Sriman Subal Das is living with me very peacefully, and he is carving Radha and Krishna from hardwood. So this life and material existence is just like hardwood. And if we can carve Krishna out of it, that is the success of our life. So in any circumstance, you must not forget Krishna. I love you at my heart, and therefore I gave you the name Krishna Devi Dasi. Don't forget Krishna even for a single moment. Chant Hare Krishna loudly or slowly as it may be convenient. But don't forget to chant the holy name. I hope everything will be all right as soon as you come here with Randy, and I am awaiting your arrival with great interest. One day after a walk, Prabhupada told Aniruddha that Los Angeles reminded him of Bombay, and that he wanted to build a very big temple in Los Angeles. Although Aniruddha was not one to endeavor hard for building a big temple, Prabhupada still told him his vision. Another day, Prabhupada called Aniruddha in and showed him the deity of Radha and Krishna that Gaurasundar and Subal had carved. Prabhupada's eyes were shining. I want to have Radha Krishna deities in everyone's home, he said. Aniruddha was amazed by the joyful expression on Prabhupada's face. What can I do? Aniruddha asked. I want you to go to different foundries and find out the cost of casting deities. Aniruddha and Subal then phoned and visited various foundries in the Los Angeles area, returning with information. But their investigations were unbusinesslike and not well thought out. Knowing this, Srila Prabhupada smiled and asked, so what intelligent news do you have for me today? Aniruddha knew Prabhupada was criticizing him, but he could only giggle in return. He loved it. One morning, Aniruddha went to see Prabhupada with what he considered a frightening story. Before dawn, he had been out in the park collecting eucalyptus twigs for Prabhupada to use as toothbrushes. He had been standing on a park bench cutting the branch of a tree with his knife when a police car had suddenly pulled up and a policeman had rushed out of the car. What are you doing? The policeman demanded. Aniruddha explained that he was getting toothbrushes for his spiritual master. The policeman had said, don't you know that these trees belong to the city? They belong to the people of California. He had said that Aniruddha could be arrested for carrying an open knife. When he had asked Aniruddha what was in the bag around his neck, Aniruddha had shown him his beads. The policeman had then asked if Aniruddha had come from a mental institution. Prabhupada smiled to hear the story and inquired, did you ask him if he was crazy? Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Aniruddha used to help me in my restaurant at the temple we had on 55th Street. He's a very sweet devotee. He would cook for Prabhupada. He cooked one special treat for Srila Prabhupada called nakaldana. Basically, you roast nuts and then you put them in sugar water and then the sugar crystallizes around the nuts. So this was one of Srila Prabhupada's favorite snacks. And he was very expert. So these devotees all had some, and of course you could see from his demeanor, whenever you would talk about Srila Prabhupada, Aniruddha's eyes would light up. He was so, and this was the case with many devotees who had served Prabhupada personally. They had this strong attachment, cannot be easily, we have some attachment also, obviously, but so in these intimate settings where they're living with Prabhupada just in these small apartments like that with Subal and Aniruddha and whoever else like that. It's a very, these things can't be duplicated in one's imagination. But if one was fortunate to have that opportunity, then it never goes away. So even many years later, Aniruddha didn't stay in the temple after that for very long. And I had engaged him. He was living outside when he would come to the restaurant, he would do service and things like that. And then eventually we lost track of him. And then a few years ago we heard he passed on. So these things are there. They're just like characters out of Krishna's pastimes. They appear and disappear, but they played a very important role at the time. So it's very interesting. All these different associates of Srila Prabhupada. Reading from Srimad Bhāgavatam, 3rd Canto, 33rd chapter, text 9 and 10. Chapter titled, Activities of Kapila. So I'll read text 9 in a very short purport, and then we'll chant text 10. Maitreya Uvacha Idito Bhagavan Evan Kapilakya Parak Puman Vachaviklavyayet Yaha Matarang Matri Vatsalaha. Translation and purport. Thus, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Kapila, satisfied by the words of his mother, towards whom he was very affectionate, replied with gravity. Purport. Since the Lord is all perfect, his exhibition of affection for his mother was also complete. After hearing the words of his mother, he most respectfully, with due gravity and good manners, replied. And we'll chant this. Kapilo Vacha Maginane Namataste Sushevyendo Ditename Sushevyeno Ditename Astitena Parankastam Astitena Parankastam Achirada Varochasi Achirada Varochasi. Please chant. Kapilo Vacha Marginane Namataste Susevyon Dayatitename Astitena Param Kastam Achirada Varochasi. Kapilo Vacha Marginane Namataste Susebyeno Ditename Astitena Param Kastam Achirada Varochasi. Kapilo Vacha Marginane Namataste Susevyeno Ditename Astitena Param Kastam Achirada Varochasi. Ladies. Kapilo Vacha Marginane Namataste Susevyeno Ditename Astitena Parankastam Achirada Varochasi. Kapilo Vacha Marginane Namataste Susevyeno Ditename Astitena Param Kastam Achirada Varochasi. Anyone else? Kapilo Vacha. Lord Kapila said, Margena, by the path, Anena, this, Mata, my dear mother, Te, for you, Susevyena, very easy to execute, Uditena, instructed, Me, by me, Ashtitena, being performed, Param, supreme, Kastam, goal, Achirat, very soon, Avarochisi, you will attain. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Personality of Godhead said, my dear mother, the path of self-realization, which I have already instructed to you, is very easy. You can execute this system without difficulty, and by following it, you shall very soon be liberated, even within your present body. Please repeat. The Personality of Godhead said, my dear mother, The path of self-realization, which I have already instructed to you, is very easy. You can execute this system without difficulty. And by following it, you shall very soon be liberated. Even within your present body. Purport. Devotional service is so perfect that simply by following the rules and regulations and executing them under the direction of the spiritual master, one is liberated, as it is said herein, from the clutches of Maya, even in this body. In other yogic processes, or in empiric philosophical speculation, one is never certain whether or not he is at the perfectional stage. But in the discharge of devotional service, if one has unflinching faith in the instruction of the bona fide spiritual master and follows the rules and regulations, he is sure to be liberated, even within the present body. Srila Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu has also confirmed this. Iha yasya hare dasye. Regardless of where he is situated, anyone whose only aim is to serve the Supreme Lord under the direction of the spiritual master is called Jivan Mukta, or one who is liberated even within this material body. Sometimes doubts arise in the minds of neophytes about whether or not the spiritual master is liberated, and sometimes neophytes are doubtful about the bodily affairs of the spiritual master. The point of liberation, however, is not to see the bodily symptoms of the spiritual master. One has to see the spiritual symptoms of the spiritual master. Jivan Mukta means that even though one is in the material body, there are still some material necessities, since the body is material. Because one is fully situated in the service of the Lord, he should be understood to be liberated. Liberation entails being situated in one's own position. That is the definition in the Srimad Bhāgavatam. Muktir Swarupena Vivastihi. The Swarupa, or actual identity of the living entity, is described by Lord Chaitanya. Jivaya Swarup Hoy Krishnara Nityadas. The real identity of the living entity is that he is eternally a servitor of the Supreme Lord. If someone is 100% engaged in the service of the Lord, he is to be understood as liberated. One must understand whether or not he is liberated by his activities in devotional service, not by other symptoms. Om Jnana Timrandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshu Anmilitamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Mankaite Gurum Yat Kripatamam Bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. There's a very strong conclusion to this purport. And obviously, nothing that the pure devotee is putting in the law books for 10,000 years should be taken lightly. So here Prabhupada says, one must understand whether or not he is liberated by his activities in devotional service, not by other symptoms. So sometimes these other symptoms are described as emotional exhibitions, external emotional exhibitions. That's crying, rolling on the ground, roaring, belching. These things are symptoms of someone who has achieved a level of ecstasy called Mahabhav. It is not to be imitated. But yet, because it is there in the scripture, and people read about it, without being in the line, coming into parampara, they take these things out of context. And therefore, you'll see sometimes this show. So it is considered to be sentiment. You know, it is not, and sentiment in most circumstances is not genuine. You know, what did Prabhupada, and now it's a very common aphorism. They call it lip service. But Prabhupada many years ago, he said, out of the blue, that in relation to someone's display of erudition or articulation without the requisite activity or action to back it up. He said this is simply lip sympathy. Lip sympathy. So this type of situation, it's very clear. Just by those two words, we can appreciate how Prabhupada was able to give full meaning to such behavior. That these people will say anything and exhibit anything just for some cheap profit, distinction, or adoration. One should never think himself above the regulative principles artificially. Someone is thinking, no, I've been in this movement for 50 years now, I don't have to do this, or I don't have to do that, or like this. No, this is a fantasy, like that. No one is above. The spiritual master, Prabhupada, is giving us instruction that no one, especially in that position, will give up the regulative principles simply because, and we understand that Srila Prabhupada was a pure devotee. He had no necessity of explaining himself to us. But where it was simply by his, but Acharya means one who teaches by example. So therefore, Prabhupada did everything that the devotees needed to see and to follow by example. Rising early and chanting. And in the beginning, Prabhupada was doing everything. Making the offering for the deities, offering the artik for the deities, bathing the deities, cooking for the deities. Everything was being done only by Prabhupada. And he wasn't trying to instruct anyone. No one was qualified. He was simply expecting them to watch so that somehow or other they would understand that this is something which must be done. Otherwise, why would Srila Prabhupada be doing it? So it is very important for us also not to discard these, what we consider to be rules and regulations. Matter of fact, one devotee who obviously Prabhupada needed to give a specific instruction, he asked Srila Prabhupada, how do we make spiritual advancement? And he was obviously expecting some very detailed response. But Prabhupada dismissed him and said, just by following all the little rules and regulations. Just by following all the little rules and regulations. But then sometimes we also forget. But that forgetfulness is subtle, but at the same time willful. Because everybody knows that upon rising one must take bath. He completes his ablutions, everyone knows. But still sometimes someone is thinking, no, I'll skip it this time. No, but there's the point of, just like the word disciple, very closely related to what? Discipline. So you cannot be a disciple without understanding what is my obligation. And that obligation is discipline. Tadvidi pranipatena pariprasnena sevya. Very clearly spelled out. Just try to learn the truth. Try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquiring submissively, and rendering service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Of course, so approaching this submissively is not just a personal one-on-one situation where when I'm before my spiritual master, I am very humble. Because it's very easy to be humble before the spiritual master. One recognizes, who am I, in relationship to this great personality. I am nobody. But then this humility is abandoned, in ordinary dealings. In the Nectar Devotion, there's a chapter. It's a chapter. The chapter is 7 characteristics, but the subheading in this one is straightforward in ordinary dealings, being straightforward in ordinary dealings. It means no duplicity, no hypocrisy. And one does not just act one way with one person and another way with another person. This is not equanimity or equipoised. What is that exact chapter? Nectar devotion is such an important point. Straightforwardness in ordinary dealings and equilibrium in loss and gain. And equilibrium in loss and gain. So everything in the nectar devotion, there's nothing there that we don't need, and everything there that we do need. And so this is, prior to, and Prabhupada, what you can tell the order of importance. Srila Prabhupada, he first translated Bhagavad Gita. He came with his Srimad Bhāgavatam, first canto, that he brought with him, 200 sets. Okay? Then when he was here, he struggled for some time to get his Bhagavad Gita translated and published. A translated manuscript type. He'd already translated this multiple times. Prabhupada, this manuscript was lost, the original, on multiple occasions due to the nature of the early assistance he had and moving around, so things would get lost. So he, without hesitation, Prabhupada just began the work anew and recreated it. And you see how thick the Bhagavad Gita is, over 700 pages, 700 verses. So someone who had translated something and worked for years might have thought, okay, forget about it. It's not meant to be. No. Prabhupada's mission was very clear. He immediately went about making sure that it was done and done correctly. Right? But then we see that the next several books, very close in order, Nectar, Devotion, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Very important. Because it is essential. We can read so many things, and people have a tendency. As a matter of fact, another subheading in the Nectar Devotions, one should not read many books. Should not be inclined to read many books, simply to satisfy his intellectual, whatever you want to call it, proclivity. That this knowledge is not something that is gained through one's intellectual capacity. Otherwise, why is Krishna making this effort? Sarvasya chaham hridisani vishto. It says, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. And so many books can be read, and then you'll see, again, as discussed here, at the end, that last chapter, it has to be by his activities in devotional service, you can tell whether a person is liberated. Because he's no longer attached. Brahma bhuta prasanatma nasochiti nakankshi. He doesn't lament or hanker. Back to that subsection in the Nectar Devotion. Equipoised in loss. Equipoised. But you see so many times that supposedly advanced personalities, that even by the loss of a position, what to speak of some other possessions, they become completely disturbed. What happens when the president, what does Krishna say in Gita? For one who's known honor, dishonor is worse than death. And therefore when, who is it? Ashvatthama. He killed the sleeping sons, the last remaining Pandavas. But the mother begged that, no, don't punish him, because they captured him immediately. He couldn't escape. And they said, don't kill him, because, as a mother, I don't want his mother to suffer the same pangs as I did. So they had to adjust the situation, Krishna and Arjuna, to humiliate him. And several times that same punishment was applied in different situations. Because for Kshatriya, So what did they do? They removed his crown. Wasn't it Ashwatthama? He had a jewel embedded in his head. Wasn't just like on the top of a crown. And they pried it out. And so this way, like I said, for one who has known honor, dishonor is worse than death. So he was totally shamed. And sometimes that's worse than killing, because he has to live with it for the rest of his life. So such situations are instructive in so many different ways, that as we're observing primarily ourselves, and then on a secondary level, the behavior of others, we should understand how in spiritual life one should conduct oneself. Right? He should learn from others' mistakes. First of all, he should hear. Everything is there, completely perfect, just like the Supreme Lord. Completely perfect. There's no fault in the Vedic literature. And just like there's no fault in the spiritual master, but sometimes there's doubt. Right? And so it is reinforced. So there's no fault, but somehow or other still, people have a tendency, due to their lack of faith. And so one has to examine, and he can see the symptoms. I say, in himself and others. If one is neglectful, this is a defect in one's personal sadhana. That he's careless, or he's, how can you say? Anyway, let's just say careless. And if one is careless in certain activities, it could lead to death. So carelessness is not something that one should cultivate in any circumstance, especially in spiritual life. Because, again, this something like that, and Maya is right there, ready to pick up on that carelessness. And then all of a sudden, gone. Someone is asking, oh, where did such and such go? Where did he go? So we have to pay attention to ourselves primarily, but like I said, we can learn from others' mistakes. All right, so first class intelligence means by hearing, second class intelligence means by seeing, third class intelligence means you have to experience it. You have to get burned before you learn not to touch fire. And the fourth class intelligence means after hearing, seeing, and experiencing, still you don't learn. Fourth class intelligence. So how many times people have seen that? There's one famous comic strip called Peanuts. And every year the same comic is republished. And the two characters, Lucy and Charlie Brown. Lucy's holding the football, and it's at the beginning of the season. And in the beginning of a football game is what's called a kickoff. So you have someone holding the ball, and the punter, he runs from whatever distance, and he kicks the ball and sends it downfield. So Charlie Brown, every year he asks Lucy, are you going to hold the ball? Because previously, at the last moment, she pulls the ball away, and with the full force of his kick, he falls flat down on his backside. And so every year she asks him this question, and every year she pulls away the football. So even after seeing and experiencing, he hasn't learned his lesson. So this is fourth class intelligence. So don't be like Charlie Brown. Don't be fooled again by Maya. This lifetime, everyone who's here now has been here before in a different situation. But somehow or other the process was not complete. Suchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Brashtak Prantapa. So everyone has taken birth just in a situation where he can come in contact with spiritual life again. Not just spiritual life, with the highest process of spiritual life, devotional service, bhakti yoga. It's not that if you were a Mayavadi in your last life, you're taking birth and coming in contact with the Krishna conscious movement. No. Otherwise it's Sarva Yonishu. You're going down birth after birth in 8,400,000 species of life, getting the pleasure of taking birth from every womb of every living entity. So, that's about as close to a hellish condemnation as you can have. But still, some people will not learn or appreciate this fact. They will not, it doesn't become prominent enough for them to take action and make a commitment. They have this word, vow. Everybody knows what a vow is. You have marriage vows, initiation vows. So these vows, you have the most famous vow of Grandfather Bhishma, to remain brahmachari for his entire life in order not to disturb the lineage, because he was the rightful heir to the throne. But, anyway, so that's a long story. But this vow could not be broken, and it caused him so much seeming distress at different times. That this rejected lover took birth as an enemy. It's amazing how these things are all intertwined when you read Mahabharata. But vow is something which should never be broken. So when you make a commitment to the spiritual master in front of the deities, in front of the fire, which is Vishnu, in front of the assembled devotees, one should not think that this is just some, like a sorority, fraternity hazing that, can be just taken or leave it. No. This is a lifelong commitment. Not just lifelong, janme, janme, Prabhu say. Birth after birth. Such a serious commitment. And if one treats it that way, then in this lifetime, he will have success. But if he's just thinking that this is like some academic endeavor and I'm just sitting here, we're all in some scholastic, lecture hall and listening and, this is not like that. It is like that to a certain extent, pass and fail. There's only two ways, there's only two things, pass and fail. So you can either fail or you can pass, go back home, back to Godhead. But it can only be done with that extreme level of commitment, that firm faith. And Prabhupada emphasized this in so many places. Everywhere you read, Prabhupada describes how faith alone, and faith is, of course, in the Nectar of Instruction, it says, Utsaha Nishtaya Dharya Tat Tat Karma. There are things which lead to strong faith. Enthusiasm, firm conviction, patience. Without these, one cannot have strong faith. There is a neophyte, the Kanishthadikari, Madhyamadikari. Their faith is beginning faith. Sambandha Abhideya Prayojan. It's just initial start. But by practice, by this vyavasayamika buddhi ekeha kur, by this one pointed attention, just like when a person goes into a relationship of courtship, he is focused on how to demonstrate his commitment, not by being distracted, not by looking at other women or other men like that. No. Otherwise, it's obvious to the spiritual master, or in the case of mundane relationship, the person whom you're trying to impress, that you're not serious. You're not serious. Right? And there's famous memes about that. Right? The guy walking with the girl, but his head is turned looking at the other girl. Everyone's seen that meme. Everyone has seen it. So this is spiritual life. Your spiritual life is you're connected to your spiritual master, but then all of a sudden you're looking over here, let me read this book, let me go here, let me listen to that. No. Isn't that, how do you show the spiritual master? Yasya Devi Parabhaktir Yata Deve Tataguru. One has implicit faith in the spiritual master and Krishna. All the purports of the Vedas are automatically revealed. Automatically revealed. How did the Brahmin in South India who is reading Bhagavad Gita upside down, how was he able to achieve that level of God consciousness where tears would flow from his eyes? And all the village men would make fun of him. And when Lord Chaitanya saw this exhibition, again, has to be shown, has to be demonstrated, not artificially. When his spiritual master told him he should read Bhagavad Gita every day, the spiritual master knew that he was illiterate. But just to maintain his commitment and his vow to the spiritual master, he took up that activity. And he was recognized by none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So do we think that Krishna cannot see if someone is sincere? He's seated in everyone's heart. Can he not see if we're sincere? Externally, I mean, yes, I can pretend. There are so many ways to pretend. People do it. They have, even Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave very, how can you say, condensed information, so concentrated. Just by these two descriptions, one can appreciate the defect in all these other sentimental aspects of religious life. So he had this one term is called Kali Chela. Chela in Hindi or Sanskrit means disciple, not Shishya, which is the real. But sometimes Chela can even be used in a pejorative sense. All right? But there's, so Kali Chela means that he looks externally. It's described that he even has the Kuntimala and has the Tilak. But he's actually a disciple of Kali. And he's there only to disturb the devotees and their practices. But is indistinguishable until he opens his mouth or performs his foolishness. And then there's another person described, a Dharma Dwaji. Dharma Dwaji. Dharma means, in the vernacular, religion. And Dwaj, like Kapi Dwaj, the flag of Hanuman on the chariot of Arjuna. So Dwaj means flag. So Dharma Dwaji is one who wears religion on his sleeve. He waves it. He's overly, what do they call those, such persons like that? They're show-offs, but no real, the term Prabhupada used is show bottle. Very famous lecture in Mayapur. And Prabhupada said, simply show bottle, no effect. Because a show bottle is just, they have, in the old apothecary shops, they have stacked up bottles. But they're in the window, and they're empty, but they have labels on them to portray what you can find inside on the shelves. So those bottles in the window are called show bottles, only for show. They have no potency, there's no effect. You cannot take a show bottle and use it in place of the actual remedy. And so we don't need any show bottle devotees. And we don't need any Kali Chelas. And so therefore the definition is given to us primarily for our edification, that we should, first of all, recognize, do I have these symptoms? You know, someone has a fever, you know, he touches his head, oh. Or if he has monkeypox, he's going to bust out in all these pustules. Very hellish disease. Right? But it's no less hellish to have these internal symptoms where one is just pretending. Right? Krishna very clearly tells Arjuna what's that famous, don't be a pretender. Don't be a pretender. So it doesn't matter what position one is in, even if he's washing the pots and cleaning the floor. This is one whose intelligence is purified, recognizes that this activity is non-different from any other activity being performed in the temple. Worshipping the deities, cooking for the deities, sewing for the deities. There's no difference. And when one gets to that point, when his mind is completely absorbed in that service, then that you see how the service has the will elevate him to the highest platform. But it cannot be done artificially. Right? Again, not for show. Sometimes people will do something for show, but you see that it's not, their behavior doesn't change. Right? So then you know that, okay, that was just for my benefit, or for their benefit, or someone else's benefit. It wasn't an act of the heart. So we have to be a little careful. You know, otherwise you see why in this purport, which we'll read the translation again, Personality of Godhead said, my dear mother, the path of self-realization, which I have already instructed to you, is very easy. You can execute the system without difficulty, and by following it, you shall very soon be liberated, even within your present body. But the verse probably quotes from Nectar Devotion, Iha Yashihara Dashe, Karmana Nikala. So it says, it should not be done to cause a disturbance. It doesn't complete it here, but that's the purport. And then Prabhupada follows up at the end of his purport. It says that one must understand whether or not he is liberated or others are liberated by his or their activities in devotional service, not by other symptoms. Not by other symptoms. So this is the whole point. If we are not genuine in our dealings with others, honest and straightforward, then how can we distribute this philosophy? You know, that's basically one saying one, doing one thing, or saying one thing and doing another is the definition of hypocrisy. You know, and I don't know how widespread it was, but when I was growing up, I would always hear from our elders who were engaged in all types of activities, doing things that shouldn't be done in front of the younger generation. And what did they say? They said, do as I say, not as I do. What does that mean? What does that even, and we would think like that, what does that even mean? Do as I say, not as I do? Just the opposite of Acharya. And so yet still there's points. So one has to, that famous story with Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Swami. So someone came to him, see, you know, it happens, people go to holy men for some mundane benediction, or for some whatever, anything, you know, just to arbitrate some situation. So one lady brought her son, and you know, you're thinking, you know, I don't know what Maharaj was thinking at the time, but the lady says, Maharaj, can you please tell my son to stop eating sweets? You know, it's a very strange request. You know, you got Tadvidi Pranipaya. What happened to Tadvidi Pranipaya? Inquire submissively. What happened to that? It's like anyway. So Maharaj said, come back tomorrow. So the lady came back the next day with her son. And then again she asked, can you tell my son not to stop, to stop eating sweets? So Maharaj told the boy, stop eating sweets. And then the mother said, why couldn't you tell him that yesterday? Because yesterday I was still eating sweets. So how can I tell him not to eat sweets when I'm eating sweets? So this is the point. One cannot instruct others in that which he has himself or herself not taken to heart. To do the needful, to avoid trying to put things in limited context based on that, what's that Sanskrit aphorism? Atmana manyate jagat. Is that correct, Mr. Arjuna? Atmana manyate jagat. To see things through the lens of his own mind. Right? In simple terms, people say that this person sees things through rose-colored glasses. But the correct way to put it is that a person sees things from the viewpoint of his own limited conception, own limited mind. And therefore everything is, based on his personal likes, dislikes, whatever. So this is not how one should prosecute spiritual life. We hear from the spiritual master, we follow his orders, regardless of the so-called personal inconvenience. It's not an inconvenience. It's only an inconvenience because I've made it an inconvenience in my mind. It's just like complaining. When a person has a tendency to complain, basically he sees every situation as a potential complaint. This is like Psychology 101. This is the nature, And the more you have a situation like that, then the more you'll end up doing that. So actually there's a motto, the royal family in the UK. Mother Aditya must know that. Do you know what the royal motto is? Never complain, never explain. Never complain, never explain. This was, many people, it's attributed to one of the most famous. There's a door that's waiting to be opened, which is known by the symptom of the light flashing. See, everyone should have an internal light that flashes when he needs attention. When he's in Maya, light. And then you can go, Prabhu, are you okay? Can I read a Bhagavad Gita verse to you? Sort things out. So Benjamin Disraeli, he was a famous prime minister, confidant to Queen Victoria. So, oversaw so many things in the Raj, the British Raj. But that's how they've always guided themselves. And one can take good advice even from a fool. And so obviously it's very, never complain. Yeah, of course. What's the point? Right? Just act. And that goes with never explain. Same thing. If you have to explain something to someone and, and they can't tell by your actions, then, what are they going to understand? Who else famous in this relationship? Albert Einstein. He's almost like the meme for super intelligence. Whenever they always have a profile of Albert Einstein when they want to show some super brain. But he was very down to earth in many ways. And he said that you could tell if a person understands something if he can explain it to his grandmother. He basically said, if you if you understand something, you should be able to explain it to your grandmother. So this is the nature of realization, is that you see things from every angle. It's not book knowledge. It's the difference between Gyan and Vigyan, knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is realized knowledge. Knowledge, so many people have knowledge. They read books all the time, but if you ask them, do you know how to do this? Like I could read a manual on, internal combustion engines. And I can maybe even give you details. But does it mean that I'm actually a mechanic? Can I put my knowledge into practice? So then that would be realized knowledge or wisdom. So it's the same thing in spiritual life. If you cannot put yourself every day, on that platform of doing the needful, then how would you define that? That I can do it some days and not others? So this is, anyway, most of these things in an ashram, and a place of learning, in the home of the spiritual master, this is all for our edification. We get to learn by our mistakes and by others' mistakes. And we choose that, yes, I will, habit is second nature. So you have to be careful what it is that you're practicing in order to achieve the desired outcome. So this is, again, it's not rocket science. Going back again to just even the basics of psychology, they know certain aspects of the workings of the mind very clearly. So they have the abbreviation. It's called GIGO. Everybody, who took Psych 101? Everybody must have taken that. Dr. Nick, Dr. Mike. So GIGO, what does it mean? What? Yes, of course. Okay. There's a scholar. And so, of course, now that I know this, I will never put garbage in again. I'm done. And so that says, one must understand whether or not he is liberated by his activities in devotional service, not by other symptoms. So your activities should demonstrate your spiritual situation. Whether you're equipoised, whether you're dearest touch on the muyate, not disturbed. So many things can happen. So many things happen every day in our daily execution of spiritual life. So many different encounters. But the trick is not to be disturbed, to be equipoised. Because when one is equipoised, then the solutions come very easily. They use the term agitated mind. It's very descriptive. Agitated mind, in Japanese, they have a term you learn when you're doing martial art called mizu no kukuro. Mizu no kukuro means mind like a still lake. So water that's still is reflective. But if you toss a pebble into it, what happens? If the water becomes disturbed, you can't see anything. Mizu no kukuro. So there's lots of examples like that. The mind is agitated, you cannot get a clear picture. What should be done, what should not be done. Right? That's also there in the Bhagavad Gita. One person doesn't know what to do, what not to do. Because he's too impacted by the modes of material nature. And the term we use is bewildered. That's a nice term, bewildered. We don't walk around addressing the way, are you bewildered? You look bewildered. So everyone should have a clear understanding that his position is not related to some specific duty. The duty is just what one does to demonstrate that I have understood that I am a servant and that I will do whatever is required. And yes, and of course, if I have a duty, it should be done correctly. And then that will help me in my spiritual life, because I'm also getting the confidence that comes with such completion of executed duties. Right? Why is pot washing, it's the first service that most people do in the temple. If you haven't washed pots, not just for a day or 2 days or once a year, that's not pot washing. Pot washing is also the path of self-realization, because it takes a little time to understand what it is, why I'm doing this, what is the benefit. But to wash Krishna's pots, Prabhupada said, is to clean your heart. Interesting thing for the pure devotee, the topmost, personality in the material world as far as we're concerned. Why would he say that cleaning Krishna's pots means you're cleaning your heart? Because through that endeavor, one is practically applying the beginning stages of faith. And by executing and using all of his senses, Rishikesha, Rishikena, Sevanam, Bhakti, Uchite. Whether he knows it or not, whether he's read Nectar Devotion or not, whether he's read Srimad Bhāgavatam or not, he is executing the highest level of spiritual activities. Krishna's paraphernalia is called Tadiya, Tadiyanam, Tadiya. Means it's directly related to Krishna. It's the same as if you're doing deity worship. That pot is not different. If anyone wants to practice, that pot is still downstairs in the kitchen. That pot has been in the temple here since 2nd Avenue. People don't know it. I have to remind people because they don't know. That same pot, which has performed many functions. We used to use it as the bathing receptacle for the original Lord Jagannath on 2nd Avenue, which also came to Henry Street, which now resides in Baltimore. And we would put a nice piece of wood, and they would stretch out across, and we would bathe them in that big brass pot, which we would scrub till it reflected just like the sun, light like the sun. Because that's what brass does. When you polish brass nicely, it has a completely golden glow. And it probably said another famous thing, and then all these little things, and initially you may not think much of it. It said the inside of the pot and the outside of the pot are the same, obviously. But for a dull person, he thinks, no, let me just clean the inside. No. The inside and the outside of that pot looked exactly the same. Not a speck of char, not a speck of blackness. But it takes a lot. It takes devotion to get Krishna's pots clean like that. It doesn't just take some limited expertise or some remuneration. Because if it's remuneration, then it's just superficial. But if it's devotion, then that pot is spotless inside and out. That's a difference. So Prabhupada gave all of us the opportunity to have that deep realization that was formed by such a simple thing as washing Krishna's pots. And every devotee who came through Henry Street or 55th Street, doesn't matter who you are now, who you were then, everybody washed Krishna's pots. Unless you were Sukadeva Goswami walking in the door, and we know. But every person, think of all these devotees who probably elevated to GBCs and later became gurus, they all began by washing Krishna's pots. Interesting, huh? So don't hesitate to engage someone in this very special service. Don't think that it's something, we can't do that to this Prabhu. Maybe he'll object. After all, he's in a PhD program. But you know who else was in a PhD program and washed Krishna's pots? Dr. Richard Thompson, Dr. Todham Singh. These are the two founders of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, Sadhaputta Prabhu and Swarup Damodar Maharaj. They washed Krishna's pots. They didn't come in advertising, by the way, I'm a PhD candidate. I can only do limited service. No. They submitted themselves to the temple commander, and the temple commander engaged them the same way he engages everybody else who walks in the temple, washing the pots. One has to have faith in the process, otherwise he'll hesitate to engage someone in washing the pots. And this is a defect in one's conviction. So one should try to discard that misconception as quickly as possible in order to advance in spiritual life. So sweeping the floor, mopping the floor, getting down on your hands and knees, this is the activity, because Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta commented, and Srila Prabhupada quoted, says that don't try to see Krishna. Just act in such a way that Krishna sees you. All right? So if this is in your mind all the time, then what is it that you cannot do? But if you're not thinking like that, if you don't have the heart of a servant, if you don't have the heart of a servant, you can't have the mind of a servant. And so you must act on the platform of devotion. And then everything becomes crystal clear. You know, there's nothing hidden. There's no mystery. You know, there's one will never leave the lotus feet of the spiritual master in Krishna. You know, and it's very, anyway, these things, I pray to Srila Prabhupada that his mercy is equally distributed now as it was then to every sincere person who takes up this path of spiritual life. Right? There's no shortage. Right? It's abundant, but one has to take advantage of it. So any questions or comments? You have to come close, Matanga. We're interested to hear your question. That's the definition of a question. Such questions are beneficial for all humanity.
Can it be a comment?
It can be a comment. But it has to be a comment beneficial for all humanity.
Thank you so much for your substantial class. I can confirm that when I joined, one of the first services that they gave us was, of course, pot washing. And they told us, now, if you want to experience Krishna consciousness, wash the pots, think about Krishna, chant the mantra, and this is the process. And me and my friend, we were like, okay, let's give it a try. It's a new meditation. Let's check it out. And we did it. And it worked.
Which temple is this?
Villa Vrindavan.
Villa Vrindavan. Of course, Villa Vrindavan is special because, very special.
Bhagavan Maharaj was there. And also, the other day I was listening to one lecture by Keshav Maharaj. He was explaining about the difference between a Kali Chela and a devotee who is just a weak devotee. He has the weakness of the heart. He's sincerely trying, but he is committing many mistakes and sometimes very bad mistakes. But his efforts are sincere. But on the other side, the Kali Chela, that's somebody who is really using his position to exploit, to really harm the devotees or undermine their faith, a real demon.
If one wants to get the definition from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he defined that, and how does one become a Keli Chela, or how does one become a Dharma Dwaji? So the definition of aparad is that one can have a fall down due to weakness of heart. But if one has repeated fall downs, then there's no question of weakness of heart. It then has risen to the level of justification, that what I'm doing is okay. And anyone who says otherwise, they're in Maya, or they're in nonsense. Almost as if I'm the only one who's right. There's a couple of definitions that similar. One definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result. But another definition is a person who's crazy thinks everybody else is crazy, not me. Everyone else is crazy, but not me. So these aparadis, they are the ones who become the Keli Chela, because they do not discard the external trappings. Is that trappings or trappings, Ramroy? The word, trappings. Because it usually means the external appearance. Could be clothes, could be this. So the external trappings or trappings, depending on the country, color, so it just, you have to really have some, and that's why it's important to have standards so that you can measure. It's not just automatic. It's not that everyone can see who's a Kali Chela. But those who can have a duty to reveal that person's identity. And this is typically reserved for those devotees who've been around for some time and seen it all. And so they're not going to be easily fooled, as some younger devotees may, not realizing why is this person acting like this, or why is he talking like this. They just... So, anyway, there's Harinam Chintamani, not a very elaborate, my godbrother Hamsarūpa, and the Vrindavan Institute of Higher Education. As devotees go there to expand their knowledge base, especially if they're teachers. So there he gave courses on Harinam Chintamani. And if you go to the VIHE, you can still listen to these lectures from, now it's how many years ago? 30 years ago, maybe more, almost 40 years ago. But he had, because he was a book editor, BBT book editor, graphic designer, he had a lot of experience, and it's reflected in his presentation of Harinam Chintamani. So this is a bona fide, like I said, if you had gone to VIHE in 1985 or 86, then you would have heard these. You would have had the opportunity to hear these if you so desired. Any other questions or comments? Grantharaj Srimad Bhāgavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Shri Radha Govinda, Shri Shri Gauranitai, Shri Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra ki jai.
Jai.